Welcome to Common Ground, an inside look at Suffolk County. I'm your host, Suffolk County Sheriff Steve Tompkins. Now, as most of you know that watch the television show, we talk to a whole host of people, but my passion is talking politics and talking to legislators and talking to civic leaders, frankly, people that really make the wheels turn and bring forth the services that people are looking for. And today's guest is one of the guys who I've had a number of conversations with that really gets it, that's really plugged in, particularly into that whole conversation about criminal justice and public safety, and that would be Senator Brownsberger, who represents the 2nd Suffolk Middlesex. And if you're wondering what's in there, that would be Watertown and Belmont and Brighton, Alston, the Fenway area, Back Bay. And so today he's going to sit with us and we're going to talk about the criminal justice bill that came out recently and some other things that are really important to the populations that we serve in public safety. Sir, thank you so much for coming through today.
So glad to be with you. Thank you for having me.
Really appreciate it. Tell us about, let's start with the criminal justice bill. What brought that about? What was the conversation up there where legislators said it's time to really put something on paper and come forth with some changes?
You know, well, it's really interesting because I think a lot of people have been working on that for a lot of years, and the ground was shifting, I think, in terms of public perceptions. I think we have had falling crime rate. I think people are more willing to consider rehabilitation as an issue. And so things kind of came together. The stars finally aligned after a lot of years of work. People inside the building, formal advocates outside the building, and then just people on the street saying, a lot of things, the various police incidents that had occurred, Ferguson and so forth, it just all sort of shifted consciousness to realize, it's time, if we can, to start lifting people up instead of locking them up. And if we can, let's cut the chains that hold people down when they're trying to get back up on their feet after they've been involved. I mean, that's one of the things that I became especially conscious of when I was a defense attorney and working in drug courts, and people are on probation. It's just a huge burden on people. Yeah. And the fees, reporting, and then even when you're done, criminal record, all the consequences of that. So we looked at it from soup to nuts and said, let's fix everything we can. Let's move as far as we can in every single direction. And that's what we did, and we ended up with a real big package.
How long does it take to mount something like that?
Well, for me, I've been talking about these issues for 25 years before this happened. And they were, I think it goes back to the mid-'90s. When backing up even a step further, right? In the 70s is when it started, when mass incarceration took off. We had 2,000 people in Department of Corrections in the mid-'70s, and that went to 10,000 over a period of just about less than 20 years, and it just took off, incarceration rate. And I think that reflected there had been a crime wave, and there was a political movement. It was Richard Nixon and Get Tough on Crime, and just all across the country, people did that. Right. And what you saw was incarceration rising in every single state. Remember, each one of those states is acting individually. It's not like the federal government did something that made them do that. That's just happening all across the country, just a consciousness shift that was locking people up. And they went up by a factor of 4, 5, 6, 7 in some states, and Massachusetts. And then so by the mid-'90s, people were saying we got too far. This is this is wrong, and the pendulum has swung back. And on the streets, crime has gone down. And people can debate the causes of that, and then people's perceptions of it. No, we need to help people. And the perception shifted in the public.
Well, two things about that, what you just said. First and foremost, the word rehabilitation jumps out at me. Yeah. In fact, particularly on the county level where I serve, people are going home. They're going home. On average, guys are with us 12 months, maybe 14 months, ladies, 9 months. You go to a county facility if your sentence is 2.5 years or less, so they're going home. The question is, how do you want them to return home?
That's it.
And so the fact that there are diversionary programs in place now, different courts, drug court, this court, that court, really gives us a chance to help people improve their station of life. So I think that, when you said rehabilitation, that was the first thing I thought about, getting away from that kind of punitive mindset to one that's really going to help keep families intact as best possible. But the other thing I want to ask you about is, in the 70s and 80s, particularly around the crack cocaine epidemic, there were more people of color going to jail. And now with the opiates situation, it's not so much a criminal issue as it is a health issue. When people ask you about the difference between those two and why not as many people are going to jail now versus the 80s, what would you say to them?
I'd say it's a whole lot of things going on. I mean, the key thing to remember is we tend to over-focus on the drug policy issue. In the 80s, late 90s, really late 80s, early 90s. That was when the crack thing was happening.
Right.
There was, I followed this, there was a period there in the late 80s, early 90s when people thought across the country that the crack epidemic was the most important problem facing the United States.
Right.
Crack babies, fights on the streets, the fighting over territory. And crack was a different thing because you need a quick hit, you need another hit. It's like potato chips. The opiates are a little different. You can't eat a whole bag of potato chips if you're talking opiates because you die.
That's right.
But
quickly.
So there was, but even then, most people in prison were not there for drugs. I mean, we're not there for drug crimes, for possession or distribution or trafficking of drugs. That maxed out at maybe 25% of the 25% of the population. The prison population has always been mostly about violent crime and, the smattering of other things that are always there. But, it's assault and battery, robbery, up to murder, all those crimes. And so those have all gone down. Those have gone down. The drug issue is different now.
Right, and that was getting the headlines.
Yep.
Was the drug issue.
That's right.
And that's what people really looked at more so than assault and battery and that sort of thing. Car theft. They were really looking at the drug issue and how do we deal with that and how do we keep people from getting addicted first and foremost. And then how do we keep them clean and sober once they do get clean and sober.
Yeah.
And I know that the Governor Baker, was really focused in on prescription drugs, pharmacies, doctors, and the fact that people really shouldn't be given or at least I don't think it's happening as much now, but as many opiates as they may have been given or Percocets as they once were. Were all of the legislators involved with that discussion, or was that principally something that came out of Governor Baker's office?
Oh, the whole conversation about drug issues is something everybody's very, very involved with. I think it's... This again, all these things, there's always a lot of different things going on, and I'm kind of drawn to the belief that the drug problem we're seeing now, it's always the same. But I mean, drug problem we're seeing now that's widespread, relates to people's sense of economic hopelessness. People economic uncertainty and middle class, lower middle class people can't get jobs, can't hold jobs. They don't have a career. They don't have the confidence that people had maybe going to work for Verizon at age 18 when, in 1948 or something, and they're going to be there for the rest of their life. It's not that they had Verizon back then, whatever it was. Bell
or Ford or something like that.
So I don't know. I think these things kind of all go together, and people are very preoccupied with it at the state level. Legislators are very focused on it, as the governor. So been some difference of approaches. People have a lot of different ideas, but everybody's talking about it. So every year, that's one of those things where every year we're going to do more. We're going to keep trying to do more, whether it's more treatment, more new models of treatment, medically assisted treatment, things to protect people from the harms associated with the treatment. If we can't stop them from using drugs, let's at least try to protect them from the harms of using drugs so they aren't dying as a result of the drugs. So we have to, getting the naloxone out as many places as possible. Whole conversation about medically assisted treatment. Whole conversation about safe consumption facility.
Well, let me stop you on that politically correct way to say it, because what do you think about safe consumption sites? Because I've heard people say, why should the taxpayers pay for people to get high? But I push back and say, well, taxpayers are paying anyway to take care of this.
We're not paying for them to get high.
Not get high, but to take care of them.
Well, that's but that's what I'm saying. With safe consumption, are we creating the opportunity? Are we enabling? Are we encouraging people to go and get high? No, we're not. We're talking about people with addictions that have addictions that are going to get high, unfortunately. And the question is, can you persuade them to get high in an environment where you can watch them, and if they start to die, save them. And by the way, maybe you can talk to them, and maybe you can get
Redirect
them
them.
involved in treatment.
Yeah.
So it's what we have is we're trying to we need to engage with people.
Right.
We need to figure out how to talk to you. I believe that we can get complicated about anything. About any kind of problem, whether
That's
it's violence or drug addiction or whatever. But it's at the end of the day, it's always about the solution is always talking to people. The solution is always engaging and persuading people to be on a different track, to start thinking in a different way about what they're doing. Because I think the way people think drives what they do, and that's what it's always that.
Right.
And so if they're engaged in criminal behavior, it's about trying to think a little more pro-socially. If they're engaged in drug-using behavior, it's about trying to think about what are you actually doing to your life.
So would you advocate for safe consumption sites?
Oh, I would. But now, see, the thing is, there's always this question. Okay, well, great. Where do you push it? Where are you going to put it? Well, let's put it in Belmont.
Yeah.
Because we've had this dialogue.
Right.
Everybody wants to put it down right. Well, the problem is this: you do have to put it where somebody's going to use it.
True.
So the first place is everybody said, well, let's put it down by Mass Ave and Melnia Cass,
Right.
Because that's where you have a lot of people with addictions.
Right.
So many of them homeless coming out. You have some homeless shelters. It's where the customers are.
Right.
But then, what's the consequences of that? Does that mean that becomes a more and more popular place? And are we burdening that neighborhood in an unfair way? I've had the legislature said, well, that's great. Well, why don't we put one out in Belmont?
Yeah.
I said, well, I'm fine with that, but we actually don't have.
Who's going to Belmont?
We do have drug addiction. We do have opiate people with opiates in Belmont. I'm not saying we don't. We don't, but we don't have them on the street just looking for a place to use, like we do right down in Melnia Cass.
I think the safe consumption sites right down there would, because there is a captive audience, so to speak, down in that neck of the woods or in that part of the city. And so I think they should be there. But let me transition to another complicated situation.
Yeah.
And that would be transportation.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts on moving people to and fro, north, south, east, west, to get around, to traverse the Commonwealth, particularly if you're living in Boston, you're working in Boston, but you're living outside of the city and you need an affordable way to get in and out. What's your thoughts on the whole transportation?
So I think transportation is the top of the list right now.
Okay.
There's other things that are at the top of the list too,
Right.
like education and criminal justice reform and drugs and so forth. But transportation right now is one of these things that has a multiple bottom line. You're talking about, well, one, we want to get people into green transportation, reduce our carbon emissions. Two, we need to address our transportation system so that it can sustain when we have more flooding because of climate change. Three, we need to be able to connect housing to jobs. We have a housing crisis. People are getting priced out of neighborhoods, East Boston, Roxbury, that they've traditionally been places where people could get in there with limited affordability. But rents are going through the roof. It's a terrible problem. But and how do you solve that problem? There's a lot of things we can talk about, which we should keep talking about, direct approaches. But for me, the other thing we got to do is connect affordable housing to jobs. So there's tons of affordable housing in the greater Boston area. It's just you can't get there from here. So making that economical for people to get from Boston to Brockton and sort of connecting the whole area more regionally, I think is a very important. It's a housing issue. It's an equity issue.
Yeah.
If people get priced out of the most desirable urban areas, the urban core, it's getting more and more popular. Are they going to be stranded out there? No. We have to have that connectivity. We have to have the transportation that allows everybody to get where they needs to go. And finally, the last bottom line is everybody's going nuts with congestion.
Yeah.
Everybody's dying. Everybody's complaining about it.
Yeah.
Whether they're riding the T, whether they're driving, everybody's complaining about congestion. And it's a reality. And it's gotten worse and worse. And it's one of these things that goes like this. You add just a few more people into the situation. And it goes, just look at how it is right now in the summer. It's fine.
Right.
Come back in September.
When the kids are back.
When everybody's back, it's going to be rough again.
I was watching a documentary on PBS about 2050 and the changes that are going to happen between now and 2050. And they were saying, if I've got this correct, there are about 3.5 billion people on the planet. Now, by 2050, there's going to be 7 billion.
No, I think we're 7 already. I think we're going to 10 in 2050.
Yeah, but saying by 2050,
it's just going like that.
So the question was, particularly when you talk about congestion, where do these people live? How do they get around? Where do they move? And how you
and guess what?
deal with that situation.
Guess what? Right? we're talking, here's another part of it, right? We're talking about climate change. We're talking about immigration now.
Right.
You know, wait until it's about 10 degrees hotter
Yeah.
in Central America
Yeah.
and Mexico City.
Yeah, they don't want to get out of it. Yeah.
You know,
it's darn hot there now.
Yeah, it's bad enough. People are going to be leaving in droves. So I just think the pressure, and you know what? Give it another few years, people are going to be migrating from Florida back up here because it's going to be too hot down there, flooding. It's just not going to be nice.
Right. It's going to be underwater.
Yeah. So I think this area is going to continue to grow.
Okay.
It's going to continue to experience, you know, people coming in. We've got a lot of great things going on in the state.
Right.
People are going to want what we have here, and we got to be prepared for that. And I think transportation is the center of what we got to do. So it's a question of driving up the level of investment in infrastructure.
Okay.
And there's a whole lot of reasons that's hard. Money is just one of them. And money is a big part of the problem, and we got to figure out how to get people to support that investment. But it's also about building the capacity to make those investments intelligently. I mean, you can't just throw money out the door. It's really hard to spend money well. You have to have people, you know, develop a plan, and then, by the way, you have the public pushing back about the plan. No, I don't want a new bus maintenance facility in my backyard.
Right.
Well, we got to have it someplace because we got to put the buses someplace at night, and we got to fix them sometime.
You know, when you talk about things like that, I always think about the partisan divide now, and if we tried to mount something like the interstate highway, okay? We couldn't get that done now. So when you talk about transportation, just with the rails moving back and forth, just try to imagine if the interstate highway was the conversation now. I mean, we'd be deadlocked or gridlocked.
Well, you know what? I mean, that's a real, to go back to that, because we learned a lot from that, because there was a downside, right, to the whole interstate highway system, especially in urban areas. And you know,
Displacement? You're talking about displacement?
Well, yeah. I mean, people, and what happened, right? The highway managers would say, you know what? Let's go this way because the land's a little cheaper here. And guess what that means? I'm going to drive it right through the middle of a low-income neighborhood.
That's right.
And so you had the what's now the southeast corridor, or southwest corridor? Southwest corridor.
Yep.
And you had that all over the country.
Yeah.
You had that in the Bronx. I mean, Robert Moses drove 95 right through the Bronx, destroyed the place, right? I mean, you could just see the rot of, right next to the roadways. All the buildings are falling down because nobody wants to live right next to a highway. Yeah. And just you have to go a few neighborhoods away, a few blocks away before you find places that people are going to live. Right. And so you just did a whole lot of damage in a low-income neighborhood, and the same thing in Boston, just displacement. So what happened in Boston is people said, no, we're not letting it happen. People in Roxbury got together with people in Cambridge, and they all fought back about what was going to be the Inner Belt Highway. And there was a huge neighborhood mobilization in a whole bunch of different neighborhoods that said, people. It was a cross-cutting thing. It was a beautiful thing.
Right.
Really.
But so that's not the same thing that's stalling the Southwest.
Well, no, it's a little different now, but I think we've learned from that, so we're that much more careful now. If you look at what MassDOT and well, really we're talking MassDOT, but or any of the urban, they just go through a whole lot of public process, try to engage people, and we're never building big highways again. We're just not doing that again. We're not going to plow highways through middle of cities again. Right. And so the question, but even transit projects, generate opposition. So we have a lot of work to do.
Do you have hope that it's going to get done?
I have hope. I will say this, and I want to say this. I want to take the opportunity to say this. I actually think people want to complain about the MBTA, and I ride the MBTA, and so I'm 100% aware of what people are going through. Right. I'm living it myself, and I'm not trying to be different from anybody there. But I really believe that we've got some very good people at the leadership of the MBTA right now. I mean, when something goes wrong, somebody goes, they must be, who are these clowns? Who's running this place? Right. But the people that are in there right now are very, very good. And they are trying to bring that system back. And they're replacing parts that were put in place 100 years ago. And of course they break. And of course there's problems. But I believe that if we can just stay the course, within 5 years, people are going to go, wow, this is better. This is really better. The service is more frequent. The cars are cleaner, and it's reliable. So that's what I'm looking for on the red line in a relatively short, and the orange line.
Now there are people watching you. They hear you
I'm saying that. I'm saying that because it's not me doing it. I mean, I'm an advocate for it, But I'm watching the people doing it, and I feel like we're making some good investments, and an investment that spans the efforts of the Patrick administration and the Baker administration. The Patrick administration set in motion these red line and orange line investments, but the Baker administration is taking them up to a higher level, a much higher level, and I think they deserve some credit for that, and building the organization that can manage that. And now what we need to do is we need to keep building, because I think we're still not quite where we're not really even close to where we need to be.
Right.
If we're going to give the people of 2040 and 2070 a system that really works for them.
Let me ask you, are you and your colleagues actively consistently talking about climate change and what that means to the Commonwealth?
Oh yeah.
What's your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think, no, I don't think there's a person in the legislature who is in denial about climate change. I mean, there must be somebody, but I don't know who they are. Most people really get it, and it's a question of what do you do? How do you balance the consumer costs of today? How much can you ask people to do? Because
for the longest time, more on a national level, there were the naysayers saying that we didn't have a climate problem when it was obvious that we did. And I'm talking like 5-10 years ago, and now it's just gotten worse. But the conversation is still somewhere in the middle, kind of stalled, or is there a movement where people are really saying now we need to put measures in place to safeguard homes and property and people?
Well, I think there's that. I think there's, now we need to put measures in place to safeguard property and people. But then there's also a strong sense that we in Massachusetts should lead, and it's in our economic interest to lead on reducing carbon emissions. And so there's a very strong consensus for that as well. And so we've done a lot, and some would give us credit for being in a leadership role, but I hope that we're able to maintain that and keep moving forward with that.
I actually like this planet. Mars may be a beautiful place, but I don't think I want to live there. I like keeping my feet on terra firma right here.
Yeah.
And so I hope that this conversation around climate change really does take off in earnest, and we really do something about it.
Well, we are. I think the will is there here in Massachusetts, in every branch, and the governor. Question is, unfortunately, our national leadership.
Oh, the national, yeah.
Yeah. I'm not saying we can't do things in Massachusetts.
Right.
We can, and we are, and we will keep moving forward.
Right.
But I think it's a national and an international problem,
Yeah.
and so
Yes.
we also have to be all about preparing for it, because I don't want to bet on the rest of the world doing the right thing.
Exactly, I agree.
Yeah.
Another tricky issue is homes and home equity.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts on that? Because I look at a lot of urban communities, as you referenced a moment ago, where people are getting priced out.
Yeah.
Generations have lived in these places forever, and now they can no longer afford it, which ties into your conversation about transportation.
Yeah.
But what do you think about home equity and giving people the ability to buy or rent something that's affordable, so that 70%, 50% of their paycheck doesn't go to just shelter? What's your thought? How do we get our arms around that discussion?
So, I don't have great answers on that. I'm going to be real honest. I'm really struggling with that.
Honesty,
I'm really struggling with that, because I get it. It's a reality. Those rent increases are just off the page in every neighborhood in Greater Boston.
That's right.
Every place you go, people are talking about it. Even, you think of a place like Belmont. There are lots of senior citizens that can't afford to live in Belmont anymore. They're moving out to Waltham or getting little apartments and so forth. But Roxbury, East Boston, my neighborhoods, I hear a lot about it in Fenway, South End, Brighton. Everybody's talking about it.
Right.
And so the question is, what do you do about it? The conversation about rent control. You want to go there. You want to protect people. But then again, if you just go without outright rent control, you're also, not everybody who is experiencing rent increases has a problem.
Right.
A lot of people, can afford it.
Yeah.
So if you put rent control in place, what you're doing is giving a lot of money to people who can't afford it, while you're giving it to people who need it.
Right.
So I'm somewhat drawn to more of the rental voucher approach, which is said, try to expand that, so that people who do need help get help. You have Section 8, you have the Massachusetts Rental Voucher Program, that kind of model that says you can't afford your rent. Well, we got a program for that. We're going to give you some money to cover here's your voucher, give that to the landlord, and that'll cover the difference between what they can charge and what you can afford.
Right.
Is
there the will to do that, though?
There are some communities that have used community preservation act funds to do that, and certainly the legislature has tried to put more money in that. But does that add up?
Right.
As you say, is there the will to do that?
Right.
I don't know. Then the other part of the conversation is, well, there is a lot of communities that have limited the amount of housing that can be built in them. So our housing production is down. If you compare our number of jobs to the amount of housing that we've produced, jobs are here, housing is here, and so guess what? That means there's a lot more demand for, the supply is not growing as much as the demand, so what you have is rising prices. Why is the supply not growing so much? To a large extent, that reflects local zoning policies that say, well, we only want two-family homes in this, single-family homes, two-family homes. We don't want apartment buildings. And that's one of the hardest public policy issues to deal with. I mean, because people turn out to feel unbelievably strongly that, okay, well, I bought in for a neighborhood that looks like this. It's got two-family homes in it. It doesn't have, an apartment building towering over me. And when you start crossing that line, you get a lot of pushback. And I've been pushing for that in a lot of places.
Right.
Well, in Belmont in particular.
Right.
I went in front of Belmont Town Meeting and said, I'm going to support state legislation that's going to require you to accept more multifamily housing here in Belmont. And I got some pushback for that, and then I also got some support for that. But that's very controversial. And then there's Watertown, Brighton, those are places where they've been building a lot of housing. And
Boston?
And Boston. I'm saying all parts of Boston, but I'm thinking, and Fenway, in my district, Brighton, Alston, Fenway have had a lot of development. Even Back Bay doesn't have development, that Back Bay kind of is what it is, and they fight to preserve that historic character.
Right.
But then right next to it, you've got all these high rises coming up.
That's right.
And so that becomes the conversation. So it's a tough one. It's a tough one. Can we build our way out of it? I don't know. I mean, in the sense, can we achieve the housing production that would actually restore a balance between supply and demand so you'd see some rents dropping? I don't know.
And listen, I've heard far too many stories about people living out of their cars, so I think at some point we have to work our way out of this situation.
We have to, and people,
I mean, what brought this about? I remember as a kid, you could afford to live somewhere. And I'm not sure when it changed, but it just...
for me, if you ask, root causes, it's the thing we were just talking about with communities limiting the density of, saying, okay, we're built. That's it. We're not looking for another skyscraper right next to the house that we just, that we live in. And, and that's where a lot of communities are. So and then they hold back the development of housing. Other communities, the leadership, it differs. And so Boston and Watertown are just building a lot of housing. Belmont is not building a lot of housing. We had, like a 7-year fight to build 200 units. And there are still people who think it's a disaster. But Watertown has put up thousands of units. Brighton, Boston is just throwing up thousands of units.
Fenway is totally different.
Yeah, and that's a mixed bag. There's a lot of people who are very upset about it.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, but who are the people that have lived there all their lives.
Exactly.
And they're just seeing the change.
Exactly.
So some of them are getting priced out. Some of them are still able to stay, but they're watching the neighborhood just change in a way of just enormously increased density, and that means more congestion, which brings us back to transportation. So from a state policy level, the one thing I know I have to do is to try to lead on that transportation issue, and that is definitely one of the core things that I'm trying to do.
You like being a legislator, and let me qualify that, why I asked that question. So you worked at the Attorney General's office, you were a defense attorney.
Yeah.
You transitioned into really policy and legislation.
Yeah.
Why did you do that, and do you really enjoy it?
Well, I kind of grew into it, and I do enjoy it. I admire what you do as well. You take an agency and you do the best you can with it and try to produce a good product, take care of people coming to you as sheriff.
Right.
And that's the kind of role, and that has a lot of appeal because then you know what you're doing. In the legislature, we have more sort of broader mission. We can think about anything and try to do something about anything. We're always at a remove, though, right? I can pass a law. I can put money in place. What's going to happen?
Right.
All I can do is hope.
That's right.
Watch and hope. You're on the front lines there making things happen, and you're the one who's actually lifting people up instead of locking them up,
True that.
trying to cut the change. You're the one who's actually doing it. We just put the structure in place. So sometimes I yearn for the days when I had a hands-on role,
Right.
a more hands-on role. But as a legislator, I can see the difference happening.
How long have you been a legislator?
I've been a legislator for 12 years now.
And why did you make the move?
It felt like the right thing to do. I mean, I'd been in criminal justice. I'd been at that point, from an elected standpoint, I was selectman in Belmont. I've been selectman in Belmont for 9 years.
Okay.
So that's sort of like mayor, except there's 3 of us.
Yeah.
And that was a great job. But you live in a financial box in a community, and it felt like the legislature was the place to sort of broaden and be able to do more, both on the criminal justice stuff, because I've always been an advocate for criminal justice reform,
Right.
And on the issue of education funding, which I believe we haven't really been talking about it, but you could have another conversation, which is the thing we need to do more above all else is make sure that everybody's got a good education,
Right.
get them a great start, and they won't get in trouble. And I do believe that. And
Which side of the coin, charter, public, or does it not matter? Just get educated.
get people educated. I'm a big believer in our public education system. I'm not like we need to destroy it and build a charter system. On the other hand, I do know that some great things are happening in charters, and so I want to support people who are trying to educate children wherever they're trying to do it. So we can put a finer point on that in the conversation about charters. And I did not support, for example, the ballot question, which would have expanded them a couple of years ago.
Right.
But I'm also not trying to shut them down either when you come to the charter issue.
Gotcha. One of the things that I talk about a lot is civics and civic engagement, particularly the kids.
Yeah.
And in the public school system, in a lot of the public schools, they no longer offer civics. And that's that class that teaches how community and government work in tandem. Where do you come down on civic engagement and the need to make sure that our youngsters are growing up understanding how the governmental structure works, the political structure works, and the societal structure all comes together?
I totally think it's unbelievably important. And so you want people to vote on an informed way. And we believe in democracy, but the prerequisite for that is people knowing what's going on.
Right.
So as a politician, one of my core missions is to make sure that everybody knows what's going on. I work very hard about taking opportunity for transparency, as you're doing right here by having this show.
Right.
I mean, just doing this show is a civic engagement thing,
Right.
and so I look to participate in that in every channel that I can, whether it's online in the newspapers or coming on shows, doing shows, because I think we have to be communicating, and that's fundamental. In terms of in schools, the more the better. The school thing is hard because we have whatever it is, 990 hours or something to use, and that's already been, a certain amount of that's been committed to reading, writing, and arithmetic, and those basic skills. And I think one of the things we need to try to do now is to find ways to educate kids and bring joy of learning back, while still maintaining an emphasis on those basics.
We are no longer an agricultural society, and this is just my point of view, but I think the summer school vacation is too long. Do kids really need to be out of school? 9 weeks.
That's such a great point. That's such a great point. Look, if you're an affluent kid, you're looking about summer. Okay, I'm going to go to camp. I'm going to go on vacation.
Right.
I'm dying for summer to start.
Right.
But there are kids that don't have that. They're crying. June. I was talking to teachers telling me that. We don't talk about summer because it's like death. It's the end of school. It's not. What
do you do?
Yeah, it's not happy.
The summer programs for kids is pretty darn expensive.
Oh yeah.
To put your
Is
kid
it there?
in camp and the lake.
And you got to find it and put your kid in it,
That's right.
travel to it, and all of that. School's there.
Yeah.
I would agree with you on that.
One of the things I like about charter schools is the shorter year and the longer day.
The longer day.
The longer day. I mean, kids getting out of school, to me, at 2 o'clock, 2:15, is crazy. When I went to school a million years ago, we'd get out at 3:15, 3:30. But then we had after-school programs if we chose to engage in those.
Yep.
So that would keep you in the school, on the school grounds, while mom and dad are still working.
Yep.
You see, that's kind of gone away now. And I just think that has a negative effect on learning.
No, I'm with you. I think the whole extended day concept is something we should be working for. And of course, what does that cost? Money, of course.
Yeah.
And so that's why I do support an approach to reforming the education aid formula that puts a very heavy emphasis on giving more money to the lowest income communities. And I'm going to say that's not Boston, by the way. I mean, the communities that I represent are all pretty well off.
Right.
Boston is well off, Watertown and Belmont are well off, but even Boston's well off. I mean, they got a huge tax base, big commercial tax base, all these wonderful institutions trying to help. Let's talk about Chicopee, let's talk about Holyoke, let's talk about Lowell, let's talk about Brockton. Lawrence, they don't have that, have a very limited tax base, and just zero ability to grow their schools without state support. So it's just so important that we, as we look at education finance reform, really driving in that direction.
How did our politics become so divisive? I mean, what happened there? I mean, compromise is a bad word now. Back in the day, it used to be the word. What happened?
I'm not exactly sure what happened, but I totally agree that it's our biggest problem. I mean, we have to get away from divisive politics. I mean, we have to get away from the tone that blames each other. We just can't do it. So I'm looking for, when I look at the presidential candidates, I look at how are they talking to each other. What kind of, if I have to listen to this person for the next 8 years, am I gonna feel good about it, or am I just gonna get real tired of it real fast? Right. I was tired on day one with the guy we got now.
Right.
But for our next person, I want it to be someone that's going to bring people together.
Well, interesting. I was at the American Correctional Association is having their conference in Boston this week, and I was there yesterday. And the keynote speaker was a former governor from Jersey, Chris Christie.
Yeah.
And he was talking about the fact, when you talk about this divisiveness, that he said, you know what, people are getting very close to that point of being totally exhausted now. With every day, it's like something else bad is happening. And I'm not talking about, the gunplay or any of that sort of stuff, just the politics of the situation. Yeah. Every day, you wake up and you wonder what the guy down in D.C. is going to tweet out today that's just going to be kind of challenging, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And he said that people are really getting to that point. They're not there yet, but he said they're very close to being totally exhausted. And once they get there, they're going to say, okay, enough. And then
what are they going to do? I don't know. I want to know.
Well, hopefully they will, like you say, vote someone in, Who's
going to be a little different tone.
Exactly. Yeah. Listen, I get the whole argument about impeachment. I get it. And you got to hold the guy's feet to the fire. I get it. My problem with it is it's going to take a lot of time, a lot of money, and the Senate is not going to push it through. Okay, but for the posterity of history and, this is what we did, I mean, to me, that argument is not strong enough. I hear the folk that are saying that, but the argument's not that strong. My thing is take that time, take that money, find quality candidates to get behind. Yeah. And I do believe of these 24 people running for president, I think more than half of them really should be running for the Senate, not for the presidency. Let's get the Senate back along with the House, and then let's see if we can't stop some of these shenanigans and slow this down. I mean, what's your thoughts? Is that possible, impossible, ridiculous?
Well, I'll tell you what, you're asking me like the ultimate question, right? I don't know. I don't know. I mean, it's a provocative question. Back in 2015, and Donald Trump announced he was running. I said he'll be out of the race by November. I mean, by September. Before even getting into the next year. Yeah. It was just, for me, that was a joke. So, like everybody else, I had no idea what's coming. Right. So, do I know what's coming 18 months from now?
Right. But let me ask you this though. So, I think in 2016, during that presidential race, maybe not as much in 2018, it seemed to me that we shifted more towards personality than policy. Okay, and that's, I think, a dangerous place
in the 2016 race.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that's a dangerous place to be if we continue to go along those lines, because you got to think that they're grooming the next Donald Trump. We got to get back to a place where we're talking about policy and talking about the things that are important to people to take care of our country and our societies and our communities and our families and our kids. Yeah. But it's this personality-driven thing that's just off the rails.
Yeah. No, I agree. And so as I watch the debates, I'm looking and saying, who's talking? Mm-hmm. And for me, it's not just about are they talking policy. Yeah. It's about are they talking, I think, as you were saying, to what people matters, what matters to people, how people are really feeling, and to people's emotions in a responsible way.
Yeah. I think the Democrats have to be careful in these debates. Miami wasn't as bad. I thought Detroit was a little tough in that they were on the attack. And, look, I know you want to knock out the next guy and the next lady so you can move up, take another step up the ladder. But you're not talking about the main guy who's really causing a lot of this.
Right.
And you're going to go after this one or that one. And I think that you're cannibalizing yourselves. And that could be a real bad thing at the end of the day if you've got the last person standing for the Democrats in a very weak position.
Yeah, so that's a risk. I mean, I don't know who's going to be the last person standing, but I do think we're going to see some convergence, right? I mean, because they're going to winnow out. The thing that the thing that paved Donald Trump's way was winner-take-all primaries, right, in the Republican side. So he could, win 25% of the vote and cash in with a large number of delegates. We don't have that on the Democrat side. We have proportional. So if somebody gets 25% of the vote in Massachusetts, they're going to get 25% of the delegates. But we also have the rule that you have to get 15 to get anything. You have to get you're going to see this race, drop down to 4, 5, 6 people pretty quickly. I think. Yep. Certainly as soon as the primary starts. So then we'll kind of know where we stand, and hopefully they'll be able to get through it in a way that they don't come out damaged.
You believe in term limits?
For what?
For any office.
I'm not a big fan of term limits because I actually think, if I look at myself 12 years ago, I got to tell you, I'm still a limited human being,
right.
But I've learned a lot,
and
I'm a lot more valuable to the Commonwealth than I was 12 years ago.
Right.
And so if I was out in 6 or 8 years, I mean, that would not be valuable.
So my take on it is 20 years. Okay, this is my take on it. 20 years, you've been there long enough, not you personally, but any person, been there long enough to get some things done and accomplished. The thing that bothers me is that after a certain number of years, to me, it just seems as if it's more about keeping your job than doing your job. Now, when I say that to people, they'll give me the Ted Kennedy, liberal lion thing, which is great. So 49, 50 years, and you got a lot of great stuff. But I think that's the exception, not the rule, frankly. And if you look at some of the stuff that these folk are doing down there, it's just incredible to me. I don't get Mitch McConnell at all. And I actually thought Dick Cheney was the worst person on the planet in politics.
Yeah, no.
Mitch has got him, by far. I don't get it. I am perplexed by the change in tone when Lindsey Graham was running versus what he's saying now. It's just night and day. And my thing is, go home. Go home. Give somebody else a shot. So I do agree that you need a couple of decades to get some things done.
But at the end of the day, I think that is a person-by-person, office-by-office decision. And, it's not like the voters can't vote somebody out if they want to.
Yeah, but they oftentimes don't.
Well,
I'm just saying.
Yep, so what does that tell you? I mean, I don't know.
What it says to me is really complacency. I think that
of the voters.
Of the voters, that's right. I think that a lot, which goes back to civic education.
Yeah.
A lot of folk just say, you know what, hey, I've had people say to me, my vote doesn't count, it's only one vote. Well, that's because you haven't been taught how important that one vote is. So I think it comes down to complacency and people just not wanting to be engaged.
Well, and then so if anybody who aspires to participate in public life has a leadership responsibility to engage people. And so, I mean, you're doing this kind of show is an important part of it, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, I also believe that, what do we vote on Tuesdays? How come we don't vote on Saturdays? How come we don't make it easier? And I know that you have early voting now, and there are some steps to make voting easier. There again, I was perplexed with how certain states are really just shutting down the ability for people to get to the polls. Well, make it easier.
Yeah, well, there's some states where they don't really want people to vote.
Well, and then there's
there's that problem.
No,
I think, I'm all for things that make it easier for people to vote.
Yeah. So I think that we may be close to running out of time here. Is there something that we didn't touch on, like, say, the sexual assault climate surveys?
Well, that's one of the things we're doing. Where I think this is for the colleges to give people who have been victims of some kind of sexual assault first an opportunity to express themselves and let people know. Maybe whether it's some people don't necessarily want to come forward, but you want to put some give people an opportunity to voice that this happened to them. So it turns out that angle on it is one of the things that really motivates some of the supporters of this. It's something that I've filed more with a sense of trying to get a handle on how different institutions compared, and hopefully, as a result, by shining some light on it, to motivate action by educational institutions to do a better job in responding on that issue.
What do you think about life sentences without parole?
I don't think, this may sound a little crazy, right? But there's murder, and there's murder. I mean, you know,
And there's arson and there's rape.
Well, you know, well, I'm just saying, murder is the one crime for which we have mandatory minimum life without parole.
Gotcha.
And I'm saying there are differences. I mean, you know, there's two kids that, you know, on the street, and one shoots another. Well, it could have gone the other way,
right.
But for, you know, it had been a different night, and you know, these kids are involved in a bad thing. But you know what? By the time they're 35, they're probably going to have their heads screwed on a lot tighter, and it's going to be a shame that they're going to be locked up until they die in prison of a serious disease for which we pay $1 million taking care of them. I'd like to see that a judge have the ability to say, you know what? I'm not going to sentence you to life without parole. I'm going to sentence you to life with parole.
So as you age, as you mature,
a judge, you know, parole board can make a decision. Maybe you know, it's a very serious crime. It's the most serious crime, perhaps, taking a human life. So you're going to do 35 years at least. But after that, you know, if you're 50, 55, maybe you have your head screwed on. Maybe you can come out.
Let me offer you this. So there's a program called the TRUE program in Connecticut. One in which you take the 18 to 25-year-old population, you pull them out of the general population because the brain is still maturing until you're 25 or 26, and so you have an opportunity to work with these young, fertile minds to redirect them away from criminality or recidivism.
Yes.
Okay. And in their program, and we have one called the Peace Program at the Suffolk County Sheriff's Department, so you have these younger guys. In our facility, the mean or average age is 19 years old, and you have them matched up with older gentlemen, say in their 40s. The younger guys are mentees, the older guys are mentors, and they work collaboratively to say, hey, do you want to be where I'm at 10 years from now?
Right.
You know, so let's get your act together. We're down at the TRUE program in Connecticut, and I'm talking to one of the mentors, who is now 30 or 31 years old, committed double homicide when he was 17. Okay. And they'll carry him out of jail. He'll never get out.
Right.
But they gave him 999 years.
Wow.
Okay. When I heard that sentence, I said, first of all, how do you tune your lips up to give somebody just say life without parole? I mean, and you know this system better than I do. What does 999 years mean? I mean, what does that mean? I mean, clearly it's a death sentence, but I mean,
well, you know what? We don't do that in Massachusetts.
Right.
I mean, that's
Connecticut.
That's Connecticut. I don't know what they're talking about. That we don't have that. I mean, that's you might do consecutive life sentences or something.
Right.
You know, for when you come back, you're going in again.
Right.
But we don't really.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean anything.
Yeah. I thought it was crazy. But here's the thing. I didn't know this guy at 17, but the guy that I was talking to that's 30, 31, I mean, this was a mature, reasonable, passionate individual that understands his plight in life, but didn't seem, at least when talking to us, to harbor any resentment. His mission in life was to really work with this younger cadre of guys to say, don't do what I did. Don't stay here as long as I am.
And that's what I believe. I've gone down to Norfolk. I've met a lot of the lifers, and there's a lot of men there that, you know, they did something very bad, you know, off the page, bad, wrong, evil, but you know that was a long time ago, and they're a different human being now, and so the idea of life without parole is kind of a unique thing here we have in the United States because we were just sort of moving off the death penalty. But you know, in Europe, you know, the crimes, some of the most serious crimes, they get 21 years. And the guy in Norway who shot like 70 people, doing 21 years.
Yeah.
Now he's never going to see the light of day because they're going to keep him in because he's truly dangerous.
Yeah.
And there are people who should never see the light of day.
Right.
No question.
Right.
Let's not kid ourselves. There are people who remain evil who just, you know, but it's our job to kind of figure out who's who. I'm not ready to go back and say those people who were previously sentenced, we should revisit those because I think you open up a lot of problems when you start doing that because this case was resolved and now you're going to open it up and victims and so forth are going to be impacted. You know, the families rather. These are The victim's dead,
Right.
but their families are going to have to sit down and explain why this was such a bad crime all over again, and
Right.
have to try.
Well, you know, I get asked that question a lot now
Yeah.
because of a lot of the states that are legalizing marijuana use,
Mm-hmm.
and people will say to me, "So the guys that were put in jail up to years ago for muling marijuana,
Yeah.
are they going to get out now?" You know, and no, I doubt it.
Well, hold on a second. They're all out. You know,
Well, some are still in. Well, particularly the crack cocaine types.
Well, yeah.
Right.
Well, you know what? I mean, yeah.
They were given some harsh sentences.
Sure, but and at the federal level, some long term. But at the state level,
Right.
first of all, marijuana incarcerations were relatively low compared to the other drug crimes.
Okay.
And second, almost all of them are out because they were almost all at the House of Corrections level.
Okay. Oh, really? Not the federal? Not
Not the state. I looked at, in the mid-'90s, I looked at 1,000 consecutive commitments for drug crimes.
Right.
Of them,
Right.
3 for marijuana
Okay.
out of 1,000.
Okay.
All of them, Brownsberger, cocaine here. And of those 3, 50 pounds and up.
Okay, so they were trafficking.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and they
big
were
time.
all, even for that, they were doing 1 or 2 years. So
Yeah.
their marijuana sentencing has always been relatively light. It's the other drug sentencing that's more of a problem.
Well, Senator, look, I really appreciate you coming in today.
I appreciate you having me. I appreciate all you do.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate what you do, and equally as important, I appreciate all that you do for public safety.
Thank you.
You know, you've worked hand in hand with us, you know, to really get our arms around, our arms, meaning the Commonwealth, our arms around how we're going to mete out punishment and how we're going to deal with the citizens of the Commonwealth. And so that's a good thing. And so to work with a practitioner like yourself that really gets it.
Thank you.
You know, and I'm not going to say that your colleagues don't, although some don't, but I'm not going to say that. Well, I guess I just did. But you get it. You get it.
I'll take the compliment part of that sentence. I'm not commenting on the college. Thank you again for having me and for all that you do.
I appreciate it. All right, folks, that's it for today. We're out of here. We're out of time. We'll be back again next week. So until then, you take care. Peace.